Hey, Jamie Stenhouse here, currently in Adelaide, and today I'm going to be explaining why you should not be using a employee handbook or a playbook for your team and your company. Alright, so there's a few core reasons why employee handbooks aren't really that helpful, and the first one is, of course, that teams don't usually use them. And the reason for this is they're usually quite long, hard to read, hard to update, hard to use, and you're kind of throwing all this information at your team and hoping that they read it from start to finish in the right order, hoping they memorize it properly, and hoping that if something happens, if an issue or a problem, or they need a certain policy or contract or some process, that they know where to find the handbook and they know how to use the contents to look for the right corresponding process. That's a lot of pressure to be applied onto your employee handbook on such a small framework. So instead, what we should be creating, of course, is processes that are actually going to be assigned and used to your team. Okay, so every single process should be assigned to your team. We shouldn't just be creating all of our processes and have them stored inside a employee handbook, hoping that one day they'll get used, hoping that one day our team will know the right trigger or the right cue to then go ahead and look inside that employee handbook to look for the actual tools that they need. The other annoyance with employee handbooks from a team coordinator point of view or a company owner point of view is that they are very hard to update, right? So if you have employees on the ground, if you have multiple locations and you have a single employee handbook or a playbook that your team isn't even using, then maybe you feel like you have to continuously update it or remind your team to use it. And the whole act of the actual whole act of actually updating a employee handbook, if it be printed or online or stored in a Google Drive folder or a Dropbox folder, can be quite tedious for yourself as well, because how are you going to update it, and then how are you going to incorporate those updates to make sure that everything looks congruent, and then how are you going to tell your team that has now been updated and the actual section inside that has been updated too as well. So it's hard from a team point of view to use and to understand and to actually implement, and also from a company owner point of view, it is also hard to update and then of course hard to coordinate and assign to your team as well. And on that note, in terms of employee handbooks or playbooks, they typically are covering everything in regards to your company, all of your processes, protocols, systems, policies, HR, all of that. And your team does not need the entire access to all of it. They need to understand how to complete their tasks at hand at the present day. And this could mean that they probably only need 6 or 10 processes to operate through every single day, as opposed to a whole employee handbook. An employee handbook that stores everything in a single place is not as user-friendly as a team member coming to your headquarters or going onto a job site and having their pre-assigned processes for that day. That's way easier to use, not as threatening, and that will of course remove room for assumption and of course room for interpretation. And if something happens to go wrong, well, you can really correlate that problem against the processes that then you've of course assigned to them on that day. So if there is a problem, it is a lot easier to correct inside a process as opposed to an entire employee handbook. And the last thing I will touch on here is that if your team has to look for a process, if they have to look for a big employee handbook or playbook, they're probably not going to even use that process, right? Because there's so much friction for them to acquire the help they need to actually complete their job at hand. So instead, again, we have all of our processes assigned to our team as tasks or duties, if that be every day, twice a week, every hour, right, every single month. We have those processes assigned to our team in our team portal or on a schedule or in a calendar if need be, right? Ideally in some form of a team portal, of course, so that the team does not have to look for processes. They don't have to complete a task to get the answer, right? Imagine if you're an employee and something goes wrong, or maybe you have a question or some certain concern, and now you have to open up the employee handbook, look at the contents, try to interpret how the team leader or the company CEO created that content, and then skip to hopefully the right chapter and hopefully find the process/answer you need. That's a lot of room for interpretation for one, and it also adds a lot of friction to your team, to which they're probably not even going to use the employee handbook. As opposed to having the processes pre-defined and pre-assigned to your team, so that as they come online, if that be actually online or onto a job site or in the headquarters or in your main office, they can see, okay, these are my 8 duties or these are my 3 projects for the whole day, and assigned to each project is a process underneath it as well. And of course, as soon as you have this, you're going to be removing a lot of friction from your team, and you're not going to have this big, scary employee handbook looming over your team that they're not going to be using anyway.